Hello, welcome to Legacy Verse Poetry. Today, we take a sharp turn from the quiet determination of the previous two poems, If and Invictus, to frontier absurdity. The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service is a darkly comic tale from the Yukon. Yeah, cold can kill and promises bind even beyond the grave. But don't be fooled. Beneath the humor lies something meaningful about how we carry on throughout life's harshest landscapes. And you may not be aware, but after Service's World War I service, he wrote a series of poems inspired by that called The Rhymes of a Red Cross Man. And they show a very different side of service that you may not be aware of and that we will be discussing. So hope you stay with us because I don't think you're going to want to miss that, especially if you're not aware of it. Now, The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert W. Service. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge, I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam around the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell. Though he'd often say in his homely way, he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold. Through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun. But the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed, and the stars o'erhead were dancing, heel and toe, he turned to me. "Cap," says he, "I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking that you won't refuse my last request." Well, he seemed so low I couldn't say no. And he says with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold. It's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains." A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. We started on at the streak of dawn. God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of depth, and I hurried horror-driven with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains." Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. The long, long night by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows. Oh, God, how I loathed that thing. Every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. On I went. The dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in. I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. I came to the marge of Lake Labarge, and a derelict there lay. He was jammed in the ice, but I saw on the trace it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, said I with a sudden cry, is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, and such a blaze you seldom see. And I burrowed a hole in the coaling coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke, an inky cloak, went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out, and they danced about ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked. It's time I look. Then the door I opened wide. There sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile you could see a mile. And he said, please, close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee. After exploring the philosophic depths of choice and fate in our previous poems, If and Invictus, Robert Service's The Cremation of Sam McGee takes us on a completely different direction, into the realm of tall tales and frontier humor. But don't let the rollicking rhythm and the dark comedy fool you. The poem does reveal something profound about how we process extremity and survival. Here's something people don't know, or at least most don't, and that is that Service wrote this masterpiece while working as a bank teller in Dawson City, years after the gold rush had ended. He wasn't some grizzled prospector, but a bookkeeper. Got up early each morning to write before heading to work at the Canadian Bank Commerce. The poem that made him famous was not crafted in some saloon or mining camp, but in the quiet hours before this bank opened. What strikes me about the poem is how Service uses humor to make the unbearable bearable. The Yukon cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was genuinely deadly. People did freeze to death regularly during the gold rush. But Service transforms this harsh reality into something now we can laugh at even though we're horrified by the situation. You notice how the narrator treats Sam's impossible request to be cremated in a land where wood is precious and fire is survival, not as madness, but as a sacred promise. There was a real Sam McGee, incidentally. He was born in 1867 or 68, but in Ontario, not Tennessee. And Service may have met him in the Yukon. Paths may have crossed. And while McGee may have done some prospecting, he was actually primarily a road builder and entrepreneur. And when the real McGee did die in 1940, decades after the poem was written, he was buried, not cremated, next to his wife in Alberta. Here's what I want you to consider. Why do we tell stories like this? When faced with conditions that could break us, whether it's Yukon cold, personal loss, or life's cruelties, why do we sometimes choose laughter over despair? Is humor just denial, or is it actually a form of courage? And I have a question for you. Have you yourself ever actually used humor to cope with something that was otherwise too difficult to face? I know it's common in combat among troops to do that. Do you think there's wisdom in Service's approach, or does comedy risk trivializing real suffering? What stories or jokes have you told to make sense of the unthinkable or to cope with danger? And after a brief reminder of a free offering we're making, I want to explore a side of Service's poetry inspired by his service as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross during World War I. You may find it surprising, so I encourage you to stay with me. This is the third of our readings, and as I've mentioned before, after our next reading, which is The Raven, we'll have a drawing and award to the winning subscriber to our channel a copy of 101 famous poems. This is the poetry collection. More than any other, Marge and I, my wife, remember as children. We read it with our mothers, and often alternating voices. Marge has particularly great memories of reading The Spider and the Fly, with she and her mother taking the two different roles. It's a great memory, and we enjoy sharing it together. Just as Service's exposure to the Yukon and its wild tales inspired him to write the poems for which we know him best, so also his service in World War I, with all of its horrors and suffering, inspired a very different set of poems. And they're found in a 1916 collection called The Rhymes of a Red Cross Man. I will not be reading these poems, but a portion of one of them is presented here. Carry On, the name of it. Kipling's advice to hold on when there is nothing in you is clearly echoed in the verse where Service advises the soldier he's talking to carry on even when there isn't much punch in your blow. When you realize that Kipling's son died in this conflict and how Service honored those who served and died alongside of him, it provides a link that's worth reflecting on. How can you fail also to reflect back to the courage Henley shows in Invictus? When you read about the courage and persistence needed in combat that's called for in this poem. I look forward to your comments on this really important topic of what being human really means and the ties that bind all of us in this journey we call a life. And how all the varied ways in which courage is required of all of us. Our next reading is going to be one of the epic poems of the 19th century, The Raven. You're not going to want to miss that. So if you're enjoying these readings and discussions, please leave a like and a comment so you can have it be part of the discussion. Of course, we'd like to have you subscribe so you don't miss our future readings. And as always, thanks again, and stay healthy and keep engaged.